The agenda this week debated direct philanthropy, explored the pros and cons of wind energy, and focused on the feeling of being overwhelmed with work. The agenda's week in review begins with the balance between religion and secularism. Peter, I want to start with you because I gather you know some of the folks involved in this, right?
Yes,
at Loyola?
I know them very well.
Okay,
yes.
What's their reaction to the decision from the court?
When the decision was released in the foyer of the court, their declaration was total victory. I'm not entirely sure, as Charisma has articulated, that's not entirely accurate, but certainly they got what they wanted, which was the right to teach Catholicism from a Catholic perspective in a Catholic school. And more broadly than that, and what Charisma alluded to in terms of the comment about the nature of a secular state and the nature of pluralism being an area that protects, respects religious freedom. It does not seek to extinguish it. There was a very deep sense that has a profound moment for religious faith in common life in Canada.
I think I know your answer to this, but I'll ask anyway. What did you think of the Supreme Court's ruling?
Initially, when I read it, I was very concerned about the prohibition on, or actually the mandating of teaching even ethics from a neutral, or other religions from a neutral perspective, just from a simple logical, mechanical point of view. How does that actually work? How does a Catholic standing in front of a group of Catholic students in a Catholic school pretend to be neutral? And actually the minority addressed that as well. But as I read more deeply into it, I think it's an amazing judgment, and I don't say that very often about Supreme Court judgments. I think the fact that the Chief Justice, who is not exactly on the radar of most people of my political persuasion, the fact that she made some of the statements she did about the nature of religious freedom is really, really a good sign for Canada.
The Chief Justice is from rural Alberta, after all.
She is, but there have been some cases where I've had some slight disagreement with her, and so have other people that I know.
I don't think it was slight, but anyway, nicely put. He said it was an amazing decision. What's your view on it?
I have some slight disagreements with that. In general, I do think the court struck the correct balance here. If we're going to have, private faith schools, in this case of a Catholic character, then it seems kind of ridiculous to expect that they're going to teach their own faith in anything other than a confessional manner. But the court did say that the rest of the ethics and religious culture course must be preserved in terms of the Quebec government's goal that other religions and ethics in general be taught from a neutral or a secular point of view. So I think this is an example where the court got it right. Their decision was limited specifically to how Loyola teaches Catholicism, but it preserved the intent of the government, which was, after all, to make sure that we train, the next generation of Quebec citizens in a way that they come to respect and understand and tolerate the diversity of the communities that they're ultimately going to be living and working in.
But even you, as a secular guy, would you agree that it's a bit ridiculous to expect a Catholic school made up of Catholic teachers and Catholic students with Catholic curriculum to expect this kind of a course to be taught from a neutral perspective?
I think that's the challenge, and I think it's going to be an interesting experiment that will test whether or not private faith-based institutions can still conform to the basic requirements that we enforce, because we do think that children also have rights, in this case rights to a basic quality of education, including an understanding of the religious pluralism and the diversity that they're going to be living and working in. So those rights also need to be honored. And the question here, and I think it's going to be up for an experiment in this particular case, is to see whether we can honor both of those competing rights. Just on a quick word in terms of Loyola being private, let's remember in Quebec, private faith schools can get up to 60% of their funding from the government. And in the case of Loyola, they actually get a full 1/3 of their budget, some $3 million, I believe, funded from the public purse.
So there is a public interest, obviously, given that the public is partially funding this operation.
Exactly.
Okay.
Should all denounce and criticize and condemn when the Prime Minister of Canada is going out and singling out one woman in Mississauga for a personal decision that she's taken. The niqab should be legally protected and respected by citizens. Now, with that said, I don't think we can be agnostic. I don't think we can be neutral. I don't think we can be indifferent to the value of the niqab in 2015 in a liberal democratic society. The unfortunate but simple and true fact is that some women wear it by choice. Some women do not wear it by choice, and they're forced to wear it. And I think that we should not trivialize those women's concerns. And it's very difficult to reconcile a full face covering that applies to only one sex and the one sex that's been marginalized for almost all of human history, and to reconcile that with an open, liberal, democratic society. It's very difficult to do that. And if more than 1,000 women wore the niqab, if 1% or 10% or 20% wore it, the way they wear it in Afghanistan and Iran and Saudi Arabia, then that would give us room for pause. In fact, the head of the Saudi religious police in the holy city of Makkah came out and said that the niqab is not required. If you're taking a more conservative position on your religiosity than the head of the Saudi religious police of Makkah, I think that as a Muslim, you have some rethinking to do.
Sophia, go ahead. I think you want to respond.
Yeah, I don't think it's the place of Omer or anyone, or the Prime Minister or anyone really to make calls on how one defines their personal religiosity. So whether, I personally obviously do not consider the niqab to be a religious requirement. You can see my face, that's evident. But nonetheless, I respect and totally understand that there are individuals who consider it to be a religious requirement.
Do you think it has a place in a Western, transparent, liberal, open, democratic society?
I think it has a place insofar as no one is forced to wear it.
I don't think we know that, do we?
There's plenty of women. There's been 4 or 5 in the media recently who have said that they wear it out of full choice. In fact, they wear it in contrast to their fathers and husbands not wanting them to wear it. So
we're unlikely to read on the op-ed pages of the Toronto Star, though, a piece by a woman saying, "I have to wear it because my husband's making me wear it."
They're invisible.
But I think,
even if we...
Sorry, can I just say that
yeah,
I think it's harmful, though, and I think this is what the Prime Minister has done, is use those examples of forced veiling, which of course, by all accounts, are abhorrent and should be denounced, but using those instances and generalizing it to be the trend of all niqabi women. And I think that's what's been done by Stephen Harper. I think that's overwhelming Canadian society's opinion regarding the niqab.
Okay, here and then here.
It is possible to be against the niqab and also against the government imposing a policy that is also against the niqab, right? I mean, those are reconcilable positions, and I think that is the correct position here. Because from a pure practical point of view, if we think that women are being oppressed by being forced to wear the niqab, the response to that isn't to do what the government appears to be doing and create a government kind of oppression, which is just as dictatorial on the freedom of expression of these women.
You're for freedom in both cases.
Absolutely.
I think the operative word is society. There's a distinction, and it's one that gets blurred far too frequently, and in fact, Loyola clarified it. There's a distinction between a secular state and a secular society. Within society, if we are uncomfortable with the niqab, if we think that there are malevolent reasons that it's being worn, we have all kinds of means to signal that this is not really socially acceptable, or it's not socially something that we want to see in our midst.
We're kind of doing that, aren't we?
But without the state intervening.
Brandy, do you think there was inadequate community consultation in the installing of these wind turbines?
I certainly understand that there's discontent. It's interesting that you showed that map actually where the greatest concentration of turbines exist in Ontario right now, which is southwestern Ontario. We have a municipal government in southwestern Ontario that has taken this as an opportunity to increase economic development opportunities within that region.
Which one?
Chatham-Kent.
Okay.
So the municipality of Chatham-Kent has the greatest concentration of wind turbines to date in Ontario. The mayor and the municipal council there have, like I said, taken this as an opportunity. They pursued renewable energy opportunities before the Feed-in Tariff program as well as throughout, and they're continuing to do so now that we're into a more competitive bidding process. So that is an example of a community where wind energy works and where we have a very engaged municipal leadership as well as at the community level.
You will acknowledge there are plenty of other communities that do not feel as romantic about these turbines as Chatham-Kent does.
Absolutely, Steve. And as an industry association representative, we took it upon ourselves to create the industry's first international best practices in community engagement. It stemmed out of some of that discontent, absolutely, but we made it our mission and our mandate to engage with municipal leaders, with community leaders, with experts in the field of siting and development in order to create a best practices for community engagement. So it's something that as the industry we recognize and value as very meaningful. It is the key to a successful wind energy project, absolutely.
Ross, if it's provincial policy that the government of Ontario wants these things in, should local municipalities be given a veto to prevent them from being in?
I think the planning process for wind turbines should look like the planning process for any large building project in a region. If I want to put a high-rise apartment building in my neighborhood, as some people do, I can't just put it up. I have to go through a long planning process that involves extensive community consultation, and yes, the city can veto it. If the city isn't satisfied with the effects on the neighborhood and the sight lines and things like that, they can override it, and then there are appeal processes through the municipal board. But there is no provincial level flattening of the process that leaves people out. It's the Green Energy Act that brought in a new process, and people don't have a local say in the way that they would for any other large scale building project in their region. And that's one of the reasons that you're seeing so much aggravation and so much frustration.
Judith, was it problematic for the McGuinty government not to give or not to offer a local veto to towns that didn't want these things?
Well, I guess that we come at this from a slightly different perspective. So the community that I work with, it's called the community power sector. And our model is really about enabling, and I said this before, and I do think it's a really important point to understand because it addresses exactly what was commented on in that clip that we saw, which is essentially if you allow individuals to participate in the process, if you allow them to have a stake, and they have to buy into that, it's their choice. And we use the cooperative model. It's an age-old social enterprise model that's been used for 200 years. We use that to allow members of the community to become a member of the co-op that then becomes a partner with a project. And for us, I think there has been a problematic about how some of these policies have rolled out. I think there has not been given enough consideration for communities to be able to participate in a meaningful way. I do agree that some of these consultations, depending on who's executing them, and again, there's good development and there's bad development. That doesn't matter what sector you're in. And I think some developers have recognized the need to really listen and understand the needs of the community and to address that, and others have perhaps not done their total due diligence on that. I think what would be a really good move in this province, given the tension that we have around wind development, given the ongoing commitment to it, is that we really look at the best practices for community involvement around the world.
So who's doing that?
So Scotland is a really interesting case where the government is essentially providing supports to the community so that they can participate in a meaningful way, because the other challenge is communities don't know the power sector, so they need some capacity building to happen. But they are also developing what they call a registry of community benefits. And so now a community can understand what is it that companies are offering, and they can actually start to demand these things,
and
right?
What are the potential benefits?
Well, they're huge. So I don't have the numbers. There are only two wind co-ops in Ontario to date. The Wind Shared Co-op that I mentioned that was built over 10 years ago, and the Oxford Community Co-op. So I don't have the numbers on the wind side, but just as an example, on the solar side, we have a solar co-op that I'm familiar with, I'm a member of. It's called Solar Share. They've built almost 3 megawatts of projects, and they're paying returns to the members almost $1 million now. And
annually?
Annually. Sorry, no, it's cumulative. Cumulative. They're still adding new projects, adding new members, so those numbers are changing all the time. The point is, these are individuals they're invited to the annual general meeting. They can stand for the board of directors. They can see the system generating. They get involved as ambassadors of this co-op, and they're getting a financial return. And so that's really, I think, what needs to happen.
Let me flip the question around for you, Jane, and that is, if we gave every local municipality which didn't want one of these turbines in their backyard a veto over that, might we be in a situation where we have none at all in the province of Ontario, and maybe we need this renewable power?
It's really difficult to comment on a situation that we don't have. I mean, you'd look at different types of renewable power. There has been a shift towards huge developments and not the small ones. And I can think of a number of communities that wanted to have their own power generation. There's one in a community south of Ottawa, for example, wants to do a run-of-river. The community totally supports it. It would not harm anyone. It would not bother anyone. They can't get the time of day from this government. The government's all about the big, big wind. So we don't even know what that would look like to have a community a process where communities would get to decide. Yes, you need to produce some kind of power. That's the other thing, though. The rural communities in Ontario feel that they've been sacrificed for the large municipalities.
Can we talk some brass knuckle politics here as well? The Liberals, I don't think, hold, well, I was going to say none, but they hold very, very few seats in rural Ontario these days, maybe just a few. Is that part of what's going on here?
I don't think it works that way. I think it's just the rural communities have been where the Progressive Conservative Party is strong. So it's not a them or us situation for the Conservatives. It is us. That's their communities. And that's the way that politics has worked out.
I guess what I'm wondering is, do you think there's anybody inside this Liberal government who has said, look, these folks didn't vote for us, they didn't give us their seats, so tough?
We have spoken with some Liberal MPPs who have said, I'm sorry the way things are going, I understand your concerns, but this is the way the government's proceeding. So just to be wearing the red tie and be a Liberal doesn't necessarily mean you don't understand what's going on in the small communities.
In 2013, the FAA here in the United States sent out what they called a safety alert to all airlines, encouraging them to get their pilots to practice manual flying more often. And the reason they felt compelled to put that out is because they had been doing research, the agency had been doing research that showed that there was an increasing incidence of pilots making mistakes when they had to take over manual control of the plane. Today, you know, in the typical flight today, passenger flight today, the pilot controls the plane for only about 3 minutes, a minute and a half on takeoff and a minute and a half on landing. And yet there are all sorts of scenarios where the pilot has to come back in and take over control. And if they make mistakes because their skills have become rusty, that raises the odds of having a serious accident. And so I think in the aviation area, we see both the good side and the bad side of computer automation, because through most of the history of flight automation, we've seen improvements in safety, very great improvements in safety, but more recently, we seem to have hit a turning point where we've given so much control, so much responsibility to the computer instead of the pilot, that the pilots begin to lose their own skills. And when they're called upon to take control, they make sometimes catastrophic errors. And the FAA is concerned enough that they're trying to back away at least a bit from automation and give a little more control to the human pilot.
Do you think the pilots themselves are aware of the fact that their skills may be fading?
They are. If you look at surveys of pilots that have been done on this topic, anywhere from 70 to 90% say that they are concerned about the loss of skill, the kind of the deadening of skill that comes with a loss of practice. If you're not flying the plane manually very often, then you aren't practicing those skills. You're not keeping yourself sharp. And so even though pilots, praise a lot of aspects of automation, they are very concerned about this slow but steady deterioration of their own manual hands-on flying skills.
So maybe, if I can rip off the line from Star Trek that I think you've got in your book as well, maybe resistance isn't futile. We understand what we're losing, and the requirement to keep that human touch is still there?
I hope so. I mean, this kind of triumphalist sense that computers are taking over and we should just sit back passively and let them do all the hard work and take on all the challenges has become kind of central to the Silicon Valley ideology, and I think it's kind of seeped into the general culture as well. We're very afraid to take on that sense that computers are better than us in some fundamental way, and if you do that, you're labeled a nostalgist or a Luddite or some other insult. But I do think that, this isn't only about protecting our talents and protecting our responsibility and our role. It's also about protecting what gives us the deepest sense of satisfaction and fulfillment in our lives, which is struggling with hard problems and developing the rich talents needed to overcome those problems and overcome those challenges. And that really is what gives us satisfaction. And yet, what we look to software to do today, in our personal lives as well as in our jobs, is to make those challenges easier, to take over the hard effort and the hard work. And that ultimately takes a lot of the satisfaction, a lot of the fulfillment out of our lives. So this is not just about how we work, it's really about how we live. And kind of the meaning, to push it a little further, the meaning of human being. What does it mean to be human beings in the world?
Where do you think this notion that we have to show everybody how absolutely up to our neck we are in everything. Where does that come from?
It's a really good question. And you started out by a century ago. The way we showed our status was our leisure time. The more idle time you had, it showed that you were wealthy. It showed that you had high status. And that's completely flipped. And now when you look at, who are the people with money and status, they're running around and I mean, it's great. Bill Gates is trying to solve malaria in Africa. And, our sort of captains of industry now, if you will, are really busy people. And, as humans, we always try to kind of compare upwards. So we're all trying to catch up and do as much as they are. And that's why college applications are so nuts. And you've got kids feeling like they need to start nonprofits and, overdoing just to get into college. So it's really been this gradual kind of speeding up, if you will, of life. And as I looked at it, it really kind of started in the 1980s. That's when you had a lot of change in the workforce. In North America in particular, you had a lot of manufacturing jobs disappear. So you had kind of stress at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum as people are trying to cobble together several different jobs. And then work hours for office workers, knowledge workers, really began to climb in the 1980s. And so what you have is like this kind of division in the way people live and work, and each end is stressed and busy for different reasons.
Your time guru, John Robinson, who you introduced in the first chapter of your book, suggests that mothers have more time today and spend more time today with their children than their counterparts of, say, 50 years ago, which conventional wisdom would tell you is absolutely not true, but he says it is. You want to explain that for us?
Well, I think what is true, and he was one of, there were three of them that did this fascinating research a couple years ago, Suzanne Bianchi, Melissa Milkey, and John Robinson. Melissa Milkey is there at the University of Toronto, fascinating and amazing researcher. And what they did, you're right, conventional wisdom said, oh my goodness, all these mothers went into the workforce, they're abandoning their kids, they're neglecting them, they're terrible. And so then you had a whole generation, including me, that felt incredibly guilty that you could never do enough with your kids. And then what they did is they actually looked at time diaries. And when they added up all of the time that working mothers and at-home mothers spent with their kids, they came up with this surprising finding that today's working mothers spend as much, if not more, time with their children than stay-at-home moms did in the 60s and 70s. And that blew everybody's mind. How did that happen? How could that possibly be? Well, you have a couple different norms. In the 60s and 70s, mom was home, maybe doing the laundry, vacuuming, whatever. Kids would come in and out. They'd play in the street. It's like, go out and play till the street lights come on. So they were not in presence of their kids. Today, you've got helicopter parenting, hovering. We're like killing ourselves to get our kids to lessons and being with them. You're trying to read to them all the time. You're engaged with them all the time. You're kind of driving yourself crazy. You're trying to spend time with your kids. And what they found is that mothers gave up time for sleep, time for personal care, and all of their leisure time, what had once been leisure for them, was spent with their children, on their children, for their children. So if you look at time diaries today, mothers have almost no time to themselves, what we like to call me time. And the interesting thing is that as parenting norms are changing for fathers, as younger men want to be more involved, want to be, different kinds of fathers than the distant fathers they may have had, men today are starting to feel that same pressure, that same time stress. And if you look at the time diaries, what's fascinating is they're beginning to give up on sleep, personal care, spending all of their leisure time with their kids, which is why now surveys are showing that sometimes fathers feel more stressed out by work-life conflict than mothers do. So there's really some fascinating things going on in our culture. And so much of that is because we were so afraid that we were going to kind of hurt our children when mothers went to work. We've kind of overcompensated for it. And that's not been good for anybody.
Would you classify giving to a personal crowdfunding campaign, the likes of which we were just discussing, would you call that charitable giving?
Well, I mean, I think the notion of crowdfunding has been around forever. I mean, if you can actually go back as far as the Statue of Liberty, where there was a crowdfunding campaign to pay for the pedestal, because it wasn't paid for when it arrived in the U.S. And it's been going on forever. So I think the notion of people wanting to help people because they see an instantaneous need has been around for a long time, and I think is going to continue.
is that charity, though? In the way that you understand it, with CRA, tax returns and all of that.
I mean, the definition of charity, which has been around since the 1600s, you know, I think that there are obviously rules and regulations that charities need to adhere to. And I think one of the challenges with crowdfunding is this lack of accountability that happens there. So I think it's important that when Canadians are thinking about where they give their money, that they actually take a look as to, is it going to an individual, a family, or an institution that has those checks and balances in place?
I asked the question, Caroline, and I saw you shaking your head like this. So what are you trying to say?
Well, I think if we go back to the definition of charity and philanthropy in particular, it is really the use of private resources, often given by individuals, for public benefit. And that is a very important term, public benefit. And when we take a look at some of these crowdfunding platforms, we are now using private resources for private individuals and for their benefits. That is not charity and philanthropy. And I think we touched on this earlier, that oftentimes what's being facilitated with these crowdfunding platforms is private individuals are benefiting, but we're not addressing the systemic issues that need fixing, and this is where charity comes in. Our quality of life is dependent upon the charitable and nonprofit sector being able to address these underlying issues that have public benefit for all of us. And this is actually diverting resources away from that. And that is really my concern as a fundraiser and here representing the Association of Fundraising Professionals.
The distinction, Mark, that Caroline is making, does that matter?
Yeah, I do think it does matter. In some cases, some of the individuals that are being money is being raised for in terms of crowdfunding, they could, in a sense, be considered something charitable. But generally speaking, most of the stuff would be very broad, and it would probably not be, and there would be a huge private benefit for some of them. So it wouldn't be charitable. And I agree with Caroline's point that the biggest problem is if we rely too much on crowdfunding, we're basically turning our social safety net into a bit of a lottery.
Sabrina, I'm not hearing the love around the table here for what it is you guys do. Do you want to respond to some of this?
Well, I think it's interesting. So, I mean, there's so many different types of campaigns. Of course, charities can fundraise for themselves and encourage their supporters to fundraise on their behalf. So I think in that sense, of course, if the money's going to a charity, then it's charitable. But in some of these, I guess what we're calling the misery campaigns, it's sort of like an emergency fund too. Although, you know, the person James who was walking in Detroit, that wasn't the case. But let's say something happened and someone's house burned down. Usually they would set up a bank account at, you know, at one of the major banks, and people would just donate to that. So in those cases, you know, at least there's some transparency here. And a lot of those campaigns that we're talking about, people saw that they had reached their goal, and people kept donating. And you know, I'm not so sure that, and I'm not, you know, I don't know, but I think that if I'm a supporter of a charity, if I've decided to then donate to the Elijah Marsh campaign, that it wouldn't come out of my budget for giving to the charity that I support, that it would be in addition to.
Although it is interesting, I mean, because there's an interesting contradiction with crowdfunding and the support of the existing charitable organizations. I mean, charities right now are kind of under what I would call unparalleled scrutiny in terms of costs of administration and overhead, and being accountable and transparent for those dollars, and also ensuring that the money that's donated, that there are outcomes and impact for those.
And no political agenda, as the current government has changed the rules
well,
to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, though, that at the same time as society is demanding this very open and transparent look at charities, that people will give money with absolutely no checks and balances in place. And so it's an interesting contradiction right now.
We have the opportunity where the technique of crowdfunding is being very effectively used by charities, in that it is using social media, talking about specific projects that are needing to be funded, and in engaging the community and helping promote that. The ALS Challenge and the Ice Bucket Challenge is a great example of that. We're also, the data says that a lot of the campaigns that we have are not aiming for this huge media burst. It's actually neighbors and people taking care of each other to try and alleviate financial stress. Is there a place for a charity involved in that very personal connection between members of a community with the associated overhead that comes with all those things, and particularly the slowdown in time? If there's a critical funding problem for someone, they need to travel for surgery right now because they have leukemia or they have something that needs instant. If I have to wait for a government application program to go through, it would be lovely if we've had that happen. If you're dying of leukemia, you don't have time to wait.
Marina, is that a fair point?
I think it is a fair point. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I think that, you know, from my point of view, this technology, this platform, this huge peer-to-peer, it's what I call a peer-to-peer phenomenon that has emerged in the internet in the last 10 years, and it's transforming a lot more areas of our lives. I mean, it facilitates sharing, compassion, caring for one another, helping others, connection. So from that point of view, I consider it like a wonderful thing. I think it's here to stay because it's really driven by millennials. It's driven by younger generations who want to fundraise, who say, according to, Case Foundation study, they want to fundraise, they don't want to be asked. So we're looking at different behavior that is coming, especially from millennials, and millennials are coming into a major position of power in a few years. It is here to stay. It's an incredibly lucrative opportunity, which is why there is, close to 1,000 platforms just in North America with opportunists, with entrepreneurs, with business people racing to cash in. And I'm not assuming that everyone has, the best intentions. It's a lucrative market. It's a lucrative opportunity. In the States, this market has expanded overnight to several $billion. So, of course, that it represents an incredible opportunity. And it is democratizing access. So it enables both small and big charities to do something. Of course, it always goes, it goes back to know-how and stuff. On the flip side, though, there is a relative obscurity. You don't really know, most people don't know that the money doesn't go to a cause. It goes to a person who is actually doing the fundraising campaign.
You think people don't know that?
Well, I don't know that they do. I'm not sure.
I don't know, when the guy hasn't got a...
We emphasize that point.
Well, I mean, you have so many platforms. You have hundreds and hundreds of platforms. The barriers to entry to create a fundraising platform are very low. Like, it's not a huge...
I think what we're touching on is some of the ethical issues around this. So anyone can go and start a fundraising campaign. And that is a real challenge because the fundraising profession is governed by certain ethical principles. And it's really the wild, wild west through some of these crowdfunding platforms. And so I think the concern in all of this is how are people going out there doing fundraising with the ethics that we've put in place? So for instance, the donor accountability, ensuring the donations go where the donor intended to, the transparency, the stewardship that happens after. None of this is happening. And then the other piece that we're not necessarily talking about, but I think we should touch on, is a percentage of the donations go to these for-profit companies that are creating these crowdfunding platforms. And so it's a very lucrative model. In fact, there's some interesting research that came out of Europe recently that found that nonprofit fundraising, crowdfunding campaigns actually do better than those crowdfunding campaigns focused on business. So it's actually to the benefit of for-profit companies to get involved in this type of crowdfunding because there's money on the table to be had.
You want to speak to that?
Which part of it?
Well, let's talk. Good point. Let's pick up on the last part there, which is that this is. I mean, while you may be doing good in the world, it's a hell of a good business opportunity as well. I mean, we do live in a capitalist society, so I'm not sure this is a terrible thing. But
yeah,
and I think
in most cases, there's usually when someone's facilitating something, there's a fee involved in that. With the case of. Movember, for example, that money goes to Prostate Cancer Canada, but Movember takes a cut of that, right? Because they're doing certain things. They're advertising, they put this program together, they are, the flow through.
Movember is a charity now in Canada.
But they do take money, they do take a percentage before that money goes somewhere. So I'm not so sure that's such a bad thing. And I think it's just part of doing business. We're creating the platform, we have costs involved in that. So, yeah.
Although I think it's interesting because to Caroline's point around, there's sort of a blurring of lines. With so many structures or opportunities in place now, whether it's your classic charity, nonprofit organizations, social enterprises, social purpose businesses, I think it's a very complex environment for people to understand everything now. And I think, when you think about sort of the classic charity model, there is maybe a little trepidation about reputational risk. If something were to happen that was public in one of these areas that's not as well governed or as I call them, the checks and balances around accountability aren't in place, that because there's so many of these various structures, that people might not actually know that it wasn't a registered charity or one of the organizations that has structure and support.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.